you think it's healthy to talk about death?
Absolutely, I think it's healthy. It's inevitable. It's going to happen, so you might as well prepare for it.
Yes, you should talk about it. You should plan ahead because once you're gone, it's too late.
It comes to us all at some stage. Has to be faced into.
Yeah, like the great equalizer.
Yeah, for sure.
I think talking about it and considering it is better than denial.
I do. I believe it's healthy to talk about it because it's inevitable. I worked in long-term care. It happened. I talk to families about it. It's a lot easier if you know what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, I'm actually a big fan of the death positive movement.
I think it's mentally and spiritually healthy to talk about death.
Yeah, I've already gotten my burial plot and I've made arrangements. I'm all set to go.
Less than 100 years ago, death was very much part of everyday life, where today we've pushed death far into the shadows. Some people would say too dismal, too dark, why talk about death? Where others would say talking about death actually enhances your life, better to be prepared, better to be healthy. Today we're going to talk to a thanatologist and discover the truth about the health of talking about death. Well, hello Barbara, thanks so much for being part of the show today.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me.
Question we've been asking people, is it healthy to talk about death?
Most definitely. When people don't talk about death, they hold it deep inside, and there's so many different reasons or variables. So right now, when you ask me that question, I think, okay, we can go any place with that question. But yes, it's important to talk about death.
In your experience, you've come across people that would be terrified of death. But yet you have a story you told me about the dynamic of that sort of changing from notification of death to acceptance of death. Could you share that story?
Yes, sure. Well, several years ago I had gone away with a friend, and anyway, long story short, she was from out of town and her dad was dying. And so she went to the hospital. He'd been in there for a while, and she's the middle of many children. And she went and she found out that no one had told her dad that he was dying. And she's like, oh, that's not good. And so she's told her siblings, she said, tomorrow he's being told that he's dying, he's in the hospital, and if you want to be there, please be there. And so they showed up, and then after a few siblings went out into the outside of the building and just reamed her. Just screamed and hollered at her. I was in shock because my field of study is death and loss. And they hollered and said, you made this real for me. And I just remember looking, thinking, oh my gosh. And it wasn't about the dad dying at that moment. It was about them. We don't want to talk about death. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to see it. But in all reality, none of us are getting out of here alive. We're all going to die. And after that, her dad, again, he couldn't leave the hospital bed, but he said right away, I need to see this minister. I want this outfit to wear. I want to be buried here. And he started giving directions. And then the other children's siblings calmed down. But in those raw moments where I was kind of a fly on the wall there. But right. Very interesting from my perspective. But right. It's life. We all react differently to death and loss.
We talked to each other about the dynamic of, say, what you do for a living, your training, or say what I do for a living, in the context of a dinner party when we all share with each other, oh, what do you do for a living? And then we share with that. It often can cut either way, can it?
Yes, yeah. I was talking to a coworker recently and also talking with you, and said one time when you meet up with people and you tell them what you're doing, and I'm a thanatologist, so a study of death and loss, and a grief counselor, and they're like, oh, so it's either like, okay, and they're gone, or it's like, oh, and then they start telling you their stories, or which that's fine, because again, people need to talk about death and loss.
That's right.
But it's, one girl said, I think she said she's a flower arranger or something, instead of telling people exactly what she does, because they disappear on her. But
right.
And you've had those experiences.
Yeah. People are either very interested in that, finally I can ask these questions, or turn on the heel and no thanks.
Yeah.
So it does cut both ways. Can you define what a thanatologist is?
So thanatology is a study of death and loss, and in all aspects, because loss isn't just death. So people moving from a different country and leaving everybody behind, or mass devastation, there's loss there, and the whole compass of many aspects of death and loss. And so Than is Greek for death, and ology is the study of.
It's amazing to think we have this rational brain that we know that certain things are going to happen, like our death. We know it's going to happen, but there's the heart connection that it is terrifying because of, maybe depending on a person's worldview, death represents the darkest mystery, or for other people it is heaven, other people it is just the abyss. But regardless, it's this great equalizer, rich or poor, every culture, everyone throughout history, we all come together with death.
Yes. Yeah, when you say that, even as you're saying that, it comes to my mind, my grandma's always saying, doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you do, we're all going 6 feet under.
Right.
And I thought, oh yeah, that's true.
What has inspired this show is we have people ask us questions all the time, and when people have the permission to ask questions and get good answers, they seem to flourish, and there's a kind of it's a healthier place they come to, I find. And so the thinking behind this is to share these conversations with the wider public.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking of people's different belief systems with death and loss, and how, if they have permission to even talk about it. And so if you have a religious background, then going to church doesn't necessarily mean you have that concept. But it just brings me to mind a conversation I had recently where someone died by suicide, and the person said, she's very religious background, and so did this man. And I said, well, and she said, he died alone. And I said, well, did he really? And I said, depending on your belief system, was he alone? And she paused because she's struggling with his loss. And she paused and, oh, I didn't think of that. And those who have a belief system, whether it's a spiritual belief or religious belief, most of those people get better or process through their loss easier. Not that grief and loss is easy for anybody, sure. But they seem to get better faster when I see them. And those who have no belief systems, they struggle more. It's like, okay, they're dead and gone, and it's for me, it's sad to see that, because when I first meet people, and again, I meet them in distress, which is the nature of my business, but you can see the stress in their face, and same for you.
Sure.
Their face shows that, and after I see them over a period of time, I see the cheekbones softening, or the cheeks start to get soft, the sparkle starts to come back to their eyes, and I think, okay, there's no cure. But you can see the softness start to come in the smile.
In kind of a general wrap-up kind of question, which can be a thread to almost everything we've talked about, is just that, is the talk, is the conversation in the family, for that 35-year-old, for the entire family. Can you speak a little bit about the value of the general open conversation?
It's huge. And again, with my background, I'm sure my family members is going to, oh, here we go again. She's going to talk about that. But also at the same time, I think it opens a conversation. It's like you can ask me anything. And so super important at all ages. Even I tell my children, get a will done. You don't know when you're going. No, we don't. None of us know when we're going. So get a will done. Is it easier to talk about death and loss before it happens? And or even talking about your own death. It's like, would you want to know if you were going to die? Or would you just want to, I said, well, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. Yeah, I know, in a perfect world. But who has these conversations? And we don't, because of the fear. And what do we talk about? A death-denying society.
Sure.
But having those conversations ahead of time, opposed to when a loss occurs, when you have to make final decisions, there's the emotional component of that is lessened when you're having it sooner. Invite your family over for supper. You might want to get them there for supper first, and then we're having the conversation.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is death is very much part of life.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for your time. You've brought so much to our first show, and we can't thank you enough.
Thanks very much for inviting me.